Okay, so the transmission's out, my 89 Chevy. When I took it apart, I saw the bearing was defective, it had play in it. It was only leaking a little bit, but it was just enough to make it a nuisance in the spots in the driveway every time I went somewhere. So, what I'm doing now is I made these two brackets and I welded the brackets to the outer race of the pulley. Then I put a puller on it, made these holes on the side. See if I can get it out with a puller. It just budged for the first time. It had been stuck. I'm using WD-40 to make it work, but this is what I had to do to get this thing to move. More updates later on how it turns out, but once I get this main shaft input shaft bearing out and replace it with the new one, which is right there, put a new seal in that little round tube there, then I should be able to eliminate the leak in my transmission. Everything works on this transmission fine except for the first synchronizers kind of toasted from where people were going too fast when they dropped it in first, but it'll still drop in first. That's the only thing that's wrong with it. Everything else is the wrong fluid was put in it, so we're going to run Pennzoil in this that has the synchro mesh version of the oil. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope this helps somebody who's working on an 89 Chevrolet or even an NV3500. This is a HM290, and yeah, the gearbox and the transmission itself, the four-wheel drive, it gets the same Pennzoil synchro mesh. So this is a kind of like a public service bulletin for you on how to service these transmissions. Hope this helps someone. Thanks for listening. Here you can see the bearings out more. I had to re-weld the right side bracket, but using some Slickum WD-40, it's making its way out slowly but surely. I don't know how I'm going to put it back in. It's almost a press in, but we'll see what happens. Might have to get a special tool for that. But yeah, it's coming out. Yay. So after replacing the bearing in the front, I also replaced the seal. The problem was the shaft was moving around because the bearing was sloppy, and that made the seal leak fluid. And of course, a driveway with fresh oil isn't too much fun. Anyway, I cleaned up this transmission to this point. I used a wire brush. I painted the four-wheel drive output with a new seal, a new bearing that should stop the leak. There's also a new throwout bearing I put in here. I got it chained to the transmission jack that I welded to an older Harbor Freight jack, since it didn't fit in correctly, and I drilled the hole out so it would. In the back here, I replaced the main seal out for the output shaft or drive shaft. The old one was so brittle it was cracking when you touch it. That seal is probably as old as this truck, and the front seal in the transmission as well. This should stop the leaking for good. I repainted the torsion bars, which hold the suspension up. You can see I painted the other one. I'm using heat now because it's December. I've been on this project for a while. There's something else that I'm doing I want to show you, but first I want to show you the new clutch plate. Has a pilot bearing, and of course you saw the throwout bearing and a new clutch plate. This clutch plate hasn't been changed since 2009. I fixed this floor jack that was leaking. This is the one I originally fixed in an earlier video, but what it was, the right piston of the two pistons The O-rings had wore out from using it so much, so I put just a slightly thicker O-ring on it, and now it's not leaking at all. Then I replaced the fluid. It was leaking without even using the handle or using it to hold stuff up. And now what I'm doing now is I'm wire brushing and sanding all the desert dirt that I got from living in Ridgecrest and living in Las Vegas that got on the exhaust system. Also, I had to put this catalytic converter in when I didn't have a shop to take the exhaust down and do it right. But now that I have the shop, I've welded up the tops where I couldn't get to with it in place. So yeah, I wire brushed it all down, sanded it with 80 grit DA, repainted it, stopped the rust from going on. I can show you what it looks like the way it was. I don't know if you can see it, but it was really crusty and brown from dirt getting on it, and then it started rusting. I got to finish the back half here, and then I'll put it back up once the transmission goes up. But yeah, this is the update on the transmission. One more thing I want to show you, if you're interested, is how I pulled out the front bearing. As I showed you in a previous clip, I welded this angle iron and made holes in it. Welded it right to the bearing, and then I used a 2-arm puller to get it out and some WD-40. That way I didn't have to take the transmission all the way out. It's probably the best way to do it. Also, the paint on the exhaust system is a heat paint. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this update. Have a nice day. So the problem I had with my transmission was that the cap that goes over the bearing, because the bearing was different, it had stood out a little bit proud, maybe 10 thousandths. So I had to reiterate, take the transmission back down, pull the cap off. Then I used 2 gaskets. And then by the time I got that kind of gap going that I had to hand make, the transmission would turn with ease. But before, it was pinching and holding down the bearing and input shaft from turning. When I let out the clutch, it just didn't move. So yeah, I had to redo it. And now we're on the suspension problems that I have. Down here you can see the left side of the front axle, and I have to pull this out, and then on the other side I have to take the long tube off, disassemble it, and put in a new seal. It's probably been leaking for 25 years, but because I never use a 4-wheel drive, the gear should be okay. But that's what we're doing now. We're taking apart the suspension. We're going to clean all this up and paint it while we're here. Then we're going to put all new bushings. Also, we're going to use new ball joints, new tie rod ends, and I'm going to find bushings for the sway bar, stabilizer bar, see if that'll work. Rebuild this whole front end and then replace the seals in the front axle. I already replaced the pinion seal, and I used new joints on the 4-wheel drive unit and the drive axle. The drive axle I had a hard time getting it apart because it had the plastic in the U-joints. So because I didn't have a torch, I used a little propane torch, and I just kept heating it and heat it and heat it. It took about 30 minutes for each cap. And 2 hours later, I had them out. And I bought new ones from Rock Auto for half the price of what anybody else wanted. AutoZone, O'Reilly's. And you can see now the parts that I got on the bench. I'm going to clean up, wire brush, put new bushings in them, and reinstall the suspension. But it's coming along. Once I get this all done, it'll be like brand new, and the squeaky noise that I get every time I get in and out of my truck or I go around a curve will be over. Thanks for listening. So in order to get the left side out of the transaxle, I had to pull the transaxle down, take it completely apart. Then I went ahead and cleaned it as best I could. To get it out, didn't work while it was in the truck. The circ ring was, for some reason, was stuck. So what I ended up doing was opening up the case, putting a torch in there for about an hour and a half. The whole thing got really hot. Then I used a scissor jack porta power in between the body and the foot. And once I did that and beat on it, after about an hour and a half, it came right out. It's the most stubborn one I've ever seen. Nobody on the internet even knows how to do it like that. So I had to invent a way, but it ended up working. But now I've had this thing all the way apart, about ready to go back together, which was the stump in my farm field to keep me from growing food, or moving on in this case. Hope this helps someone. If you get one stuck on the left side, you have to use a propane torch in the center of the hole, of this hole on the other side, and then put pressure on it and beat it out with a ball peen hammer. Nobody else has ever posted on this, so I'm posting on this so people can get help when they need it. Have a nice day.